Hi everyone.
Well, as you may know, last weekend Carol and I were invited along to see what was going on behind the scenes at the National Waterways Museum in
Ellesmere Port.
Ellesmere Port. And while we were there, we had the pleasure of interviewing
The National Hydrology Manager for the CRT.
So here's a guy that knows a lot about water management, water conservation, reasons why they lose water, how they can improve water retention on the system. So he's a very, very interesting guy, whether you're a boater or whether you're just a user of a canal. So we really did learn a lot about the work that CRT puts into maintaining water supplies throughout the canal network. And of course, as with all things that are serene and beautiful, it's much more complicated than it looks. So we think you'll enjoy learning more about the CRT's approach to water management. If you get the chance to go to the National Waterways Museum, if it's anywhere close to you, if it's in 1,000 miles of you, it is well worth the effort to go there. It is a great place, lovely people. They'll make you very welcome, and there's so much to see for everyone in the family.
It's a great day out.
It is a great day out. We will go back there. We had said that going there for a few hours was not enough.
It wasn't.
You can happily spend a very full day at the museum and have a great time and come away with great memories. So enjoy.
So I'm Adam Comerford. I'm the Trust's National Hydrology Manager, so I lead the water management team. So it's a national role, look after water resources and flood risk across the whole network. And we're demonstrating our lock flume, which shows how a lock works.
Ah.
Nathan's just fired up the pump. And we use this at schools and exhibitions, and I think the best way to describe it is a means of demonstrating in simple terms how a lock allows a boat to go uphill or downhill. The water always flows downhill, but boats need to go uphill. Yep. So when the canals were built, obviously locks were the key thing that differentiated them from some of the traditional rivers where you could boat up a river. And obviously the lock allows boats to go uphill and downhill. So we just use this to demonstrate. So we've got the equivalent of a set of lock gates. We've got lock paddles, so it's all out of perspex. But Nathan, you can operate the lock paddle. So in real life, of course, you'd be using the windlass and opening the lock paddle. Effectively, that allows the lock chamber to fill. Hopefully, should equalise the water levels.
Do you play like this in the bathtub?
It's Nathan's very own shower boat for washing his hair. And so we can just explain the principles of lock operation, particularly about things like making sure the levels are equalised.
Yes.
Otherwise you won't be able to push the gates open in real life.
Exactly.
Yep.
Once you do get that equalised level, as you know, probably as a boater, that last little bit seems to take forever, doesn't it? And you're pushing the balance beam, waiting for it to move, and then eventually it just gives, doesn't it?
Why does that last bit take so long? Is it relative pressures?
Yeah, it's the differential head, because when the lock is completely empty, effectively, there's a greater driving head sending the water from upstream into the lock chamber, so it goes faster. Once you get to almost equal, there's very little differential head that's pushing the water, so that last bit. So it's not a linear sort of filling. You'll notice that the boat comes up quite quickly and it slows, but it's a very sort of, it's almost like a curve of rising, isn't it?
And it's those last few inches where all the back injuries happen, because people think, oh, I can open this now.
And you won't be able to, even if it's still an inch or two difference, you won't be able to push the weight of the gate against that water pressure. So then once you're into the lock chamber, then it's the same, the principle of downstream or tailgate paddles, water level drops, and again the initial drop is fast as the boat lowers down, and you're basically trying to get that equalised water level.
Yep.
So we use this.
You can see that effect actually, Adam, can't you? You can see it slows down towards the end.
Yeah, you can. And we've got a little bypass. As boaters, you'll know there's the bypass arrangement there, so we can sort of throttle the flow a little bit on the bypass to almost accentuate the effect of how slow or fast the lock can fill. And we've got 2 pumps that are running inside the tank there. But we can also use this for, we can take out the lock module and we can put in culverts, so to show the effect of culverts that pass water under our canal.
Right.
And sometimes they get blocked up, and you can look at the effect of water levels upstream, which can, of course, if those culverts are blocked, the water can find its way into the canal. And in the last few weeks, we've had so many storms and things putting water into our canal network, causing real problems for flooding. I think we had a culvert failure, and there's so many culverts that take those streams and watercourses under the canal.
Yeah, we see them.
They're out of sight, they're difficult to inspect and maintain, and so sometimes they do fail quite catastrophically, and that can lead to
So when a culvert fails, Adam, what do we mean by that? What's the typical mode of failure?
So quite often what can happen is a lot of the culverts are sort of basically a brick tunnel that's passing a stream under the canal, and you can imagine the bricks eventually, with all the water that's flowing underneath, normally over 200 years, eventually those bricks get worn out, some of them fall out, you get roots and other things penetrate through, and you start to get some leakage finding its way in, and eventually you'll get a little collapse, and the water pressure from above, because typically you've got the culvert, you've got the clay lining of the canal of a certain depth, and then you've got the water above. Eventually that water's finding its way through, and it'll start to push down and cause that breach, and then you'll see that almost a whirlpool effect. The water will be going down the plug hole. Some culverts traditionally used to have what we call a bed valve, so a way of emptying the canal in a long time ago. We don't have very many of them now, we've decommissioned them, but they would basically have a plug in the bottom of the canal that would send water into the top of the culvert. We've got rid of and clayed up or concreted up a lot of these bed valves. They were used traditionally as a way, quite an extreme way of emptying the canal in a hurry.
I know some of the aqueducts have those plug holes as well, don't they?
Yes, they do. And some of them, if you've boated along the Llangollen, the Pontysilty aqueduct,
we did.
It's got quite a dramatic one. When we pull the plug there, the water disappears.
I bet that would be
down.
fun to watch.
Right into the River
They've just done that, haven't
Yes,
they?
they've been dewatering. So we're doing some work on the aqueduct this winter. So that's a major project. Because of course that canal is used not just for boating, but it's also for transferring water.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's a major source of water for United Utilities.
Is that up from Horseshoe Falls? That brings
from
it
the
down?
River Dee. So all the water coming in from the River Dee, up to about 83 million litres a day.
Wow.
Is the amount we're allowed to take out of the river. And then that obviously flows all the way down 50 odd kilometres of the canal and ends up down to Hurleston. You've got the reservoir there, and that's where the water company takes it, treats it, and uses it for drinking water.
Okay.
Isn't that Hurleston Reservoir right at the beginning of the Llangollen branch?
Yeah,
I think it's right there.
Yes.
I remember seeing that one.
Yes, it's the one
yeah.
right next to the junction.
Yes.
With the Shropshire Union.
Yeah.
So yes, it's at that first bit, and it's interesting. You've got Llangollen branch, because some people call it the Llangollen Canal.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
the Llangollen branch of the Shropshire Union.
Of the Shropshire Union, yes, yeah.
So we from water management, we provide advice to the whole business on water resources, on flood risk, on climate change, on all the future
How is
pressures.
all the new housing affecting the canal?
In a lot of places where there's new development happening next to the canal, it's great. It's regenerating the canal side environment.
Yes.
It's brilliant. We're getting investment in towpaths from developers who want to make the area look amazing.
Yeah.
But of course, sometimes the developments lead to more water running in.
Yes.
So when you've got heavy rainfall events, that excess water can come in. But we work really closely with developers to make sure we model the impact. We make sure it's not going to cause too much of an effect. We don't want it to cause flooding.
Right.
But for the trust, we also have the ability to charge money for developers to put water in our canal.
Okay.
So we are getting some financial income for that, which goes into maintaining the canal network. But we don't want it to come in and cause flooding. So it's a balance between the risk and the reward, really,
That sounds
to make sure we're not causing problems.
Thinking about going back a little bit to some of the repair aspects of managing the water, the repairs themselves, I mean, I've just been hearing some of the prices of putting some lock gates in. These repairs can also be horribly expensive, can't they?
Yes. So the amount of money the trust's having to spend, the cost of materials and labour and machinery and plants and equipment is going up and up and up. We're spending millions of pounds every winter, and that's when we do the majority of our works through the winter months. But the pressure on us with an ageing network, the canal network isn't getting any younger, and all those assets that were built 200 years ago, they've been continually maintained and upgraded and repaired, but some of them are getting towards the end of their workable life, and we're having to do major investments. And a lot of our spend recently is and in the next few years will be on reservoirs.
Okay.
Huge amounts to spend on reservoirs, because on average, our canal reservoirs are about 200 years old.
Yeah.
If you compare them to water company reservoirs in England, they're only about 120 years old on
Right.
average.
Yeah.
So our canals sort of almost predate the Victorian engineering of the water companies and go back further. And it means when you try and bring a reservoir up to modern day safety standards, you're starting from a worse starting point. So it's more expensive.
Yes.
So the engineering is harder to work with, more complicated, and ultimately more expensive. We've
Right.
still got to achieve those legal standards for the reservoirs.
And I don't think we think about that as boaters. We don't think so much about the reservoirs and all the things that, are involved. It's not just the canal itself.
Exactly, yeah. And I think for us as water management team, I've worked for the Trust for over 20 years, and one of the challenges is continually reminding boaters and all the users of the canal network, the water's got to come from somewhere. We've got to manage that water. It doesn't get there by accident, it doesn't stay there by accident.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of investment, but a lot of it is out of sight. The reservoirs are up on the hillsides,
Yes.
miles away. But they're costing us millions of pounds to maintain, and we have to operate them effectively. And with climate change and with droughts, and particularly 2022, we had such a long, dry summer.
It was
and
hot, wasn't it?
Very hot summer. It wasn't just the lack of rainfall, which is what would define a drought for us.
Yeah.
It was the temperatures as well.
Yeah,
So
a lot of evaporation.
you get a
and-
double whammy. Yes,
yeah.
there isn't the rainfall bringing the water into the network and into the reservoirs, but the evaporation was even
Yeah.
increasing. And people are out enjoying the network as well,
Yes.
which is great, but it uses more water.
You have to be
through-
careful
through
to
the
make
locks.
sure the water
What
stays.
are there any things that boaters can do? I mean, because we sort of speaking from that perspective, to really stretch the water further, to conserve the water. The obvious one is operation of locks in.
Yeah,
Making sure
absolutely.
you close the paddles.
All the classic things, yeah. Close the paddles, close the gates. In the majority of cases, you're expected, to follow the normal etiquette in terms of boating. Particularly looking upstream and downstream when you're about to approach a lock. Is there someone already coming towards you?
You
Is
can
the
use
lock
it.
set in their favour?
Yes,
rather
absolutely.
than rushing to get through and use another lock full of water. If it's a broad lock, sharing where possible with other boats, waiting for another boat to join you, and sharing your way through a lock flight. We've got volunteer lock keepers who are helping to encourage that sort of good water housekeeping when it comes to boating, and I guess reporting leaks. And I know
Yes.
sometimes the Trust, there's a lot of things we want to try and fix, and we can't get to every issue immediately.
Right.
But if we've got major water losses, in some cases we're pumping that water around, so it's really expensive and really
Yeah.
inefficient if you're pumping water uphill to then lose it back downhill again,
Yes.
or out through a leak. So, telling us about those problems, it's a big network for us to keep an eye on. But there's lots boaters can do, and just sort of spreading the word around water efficiency, particularly in the summer months. But also, it's not just the summer months, because if we look after water carefully in the spring, Easter, going in towards the summer, the water will last longer, be there later in the year.
Yeah.
And with our reservoirs, we've got 72 reservoirs that
Really?
supply the canal
Wow.
network. But if we're not getting the rainfall coming in from the nearby catchments, then eventually those water levels will drop. And that's what we found in 2022, that some of our reservoirs, like on the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, got to really low levels.
I know the Lancaster tends to get very low later in the summer.
Yeah, it can do. I mean, Killington Reservoir is one of our biggest, but it's the primary feeder for the Lancaster Canal, and that's a very long canal with just that main water source.
Yes.
Elsewhere, like the Leeds and Liverpool, we've got 7 or so reservoirs, but with their engineering works that we're doing at the moment, we're having to keep some of the levels down low. So that means we start the boating season on the back foot. So
Right.
we've already got lower levels, or if you have a dry winter and you get a lack of refill, then you're starting the boating season with less water to work with.
Which is a pain for us because we got to keep cleaning our weed hatch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of, because you're talking about the age of the system, we've got culverts that are old as Methuselah, haven't we, basically? and so are you also upgrading using sort of more modern materials and techniques?
Yeah, very much so. So take things like culverts, rather than excavate the canal and rebuild a brand new brick culvert, as would have been traditionally the way, we're more likely to line the culvert.
Okay.
So we have liners that you sort of basically pull a liner through, and it cures in place. You cure it with ultraviolet light, and it creates this new plastic sort of sleeve within the old brickwork that will then last probably not 200 years, but will last a good amount of time. It's a lot cheaper, so we can do more of them.
And less prone to failure incrementally, isn't
Yes,
it?
exactly. And when it comes to other investments, obviously we're trying to use 21st century technology and techniques, whether it's engineering techniques, we're obviously working safely, but things like lock gates that we're doing work on, can we use composite lock gates instead of oak? Can we mix it with other materials which have got either different lifespan or cheaper, but over the design life are going to do better. They're not going to leak as much, easier to repair, sort of in a modular way, so you can fit bits of the lock gate
That would be useful,
to make the assets last as long as possible. And I think for us, as you'll probably be aware, with the government contract that we have, the government grant, we know that the announcement we've had last summer means that we might have to live with less income from that source. We've got to make that money, that every bit of spend goes as far as possible.
Yes.
Yeah,
for the
absolutely.
network.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's really interesting. I'd never heard about maybe using different materials on lock gates before. It's first time
Have they
I've heard
started
that.
doing that?
So there's been some work on the Kent and Avon Canal. I know they've been doing a bit of trialling of lock gate materials there. I mean, there are some lock gates already around the network, but it's trying to blend that sort of heritage aspect.
Yes.
People expect to see the traditional style of lock gate, but the canals have always had to adapt with the times. We've got a lot more computer monitoring. Originally when the canals were built, they didn't have back pumps to push water around the network, but as the canals and freight traffic grew and water resources were so critical, they invested more and more in the water resources. And we, in the last 20-30 years, have upgraded our pumping systems, we've upgraded our telemetry, so our computer monitoring, so we can actually watch what's going on remotely from our phones, from our computers, to see what the water levels are doing, to control pumps and sluices.
I suppose that you would also notice if there was a breach quicker with that.
Exactly, yeah. So when we have had breach events, we've seen the water levels drop, the alarms go to our phones, and we know something's happening.
Yeah.
But not every part of the network has got a water level
Right.
sensor.
But again, that's investment, isn't it?
It's investment and
Yeah.
maintenance, because when you buy this high-tech electronic kit, it's got a much shorter shelf life. If you reline a culvert or if you rebuild lock gates in the last many years, the electronic kit, like the mobile phone, after 3, 4, 5 years,
Yeah. You
need
it's
an
almost
upgrade.
obsolete. So when we're putting in effectively mobile phone kit or that level of technology to monitor the canal, the continual investment is another sort of spend that we have to factor in
Interesting.
to stay up with the technology.
Just out of curiosity, how often, if you had to say average, would you see breaches in the canal?
So we, as water management team, we've been collating a historic archive of breach events, and across the entire network we've gone back all through the historic accounts, the National Archive, newspaper clippings, going right back to the original canal company annual reports and accounts, which have had all those archives, and we've collated about 350 breach events.
Okay.
The ones that were big enough to get
Right.
notable. So,
Yeah.
so there's
Like
always
the
the question
Dutton.
of what's a breach and what's a small breach or a big leak.
Yeah.
But we've collated about 350 spanning the whole network over the 200 odd years.
That's not
So
horrible.
on average, we get probably 1 to 2 breaches a year.
Okay.
Some of them are very dramatic, very significant. Some of them are embankment failures. Sometimes they're culvert failures that lead to an embankment failure. The causes for breaches are quite varied. A lot of people expect it to be when it's raining hard and the water levels maybe spill over and we get overtopping. But actually, that doesn't happen that often.
Right.
We've looked at other reasons for causing breaches, and sometimes it's things what you'd almost describe as a blue sky failure. I mean, the sun's shining, it's not raining hard, but sometimes the canal fails, and it can be things like burrowing animals, badgers, and
There
the
you
like,
go. Yes,
in
yes.
an embankment, a sandy embankment, making their home, but that creates a pathway for the water to erode out. Sometimes we get breaches where we have what we call third-party activity, where a developer is working on a site adjacent to an embankment and doesn't quite realise that embankment is holding the water in the canal. And if they're doing a bit of work with their digger, and sometimes leads to a weakness in the embankment, that can lead to a failure. So there's other reasons that can cause breaches, but like I say, on average 1 to 2 a year. But when they happen, they can be quite spectacular, unfortunately. Impact on boaters, flooding downstream, and a huge cost to repair as well.
I suppose the advantage of a contractor doing it is they're going to have insurance, whereas a badger isn't.
Yes.
True.
Yeah, exactly.
True.
Okay.
So we do a lot of work, and part of our government contract is linked to breach risk, because they have the potential to cause flooding, loss of life. At the extreme example, there could be loss of life due to flooding. It's something we take very seriously in terms of managing our embankments, those critical assets, making sure that...
And also the effect on ecosystems adjacent to the canal, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So you get those big flood events, it can cause that property damage as well. I mean, a lot of the time when we've had breach events, usually the flooding finds its way into a nearby river or stream, and sometimes it's farmland, agricultural land. Occasionally it can be properties as well, which is obviously really concerning when that happens, especially when you've got canals going through urban areas.
Yep.
What about maintaining the water quality? So we talk about quantity.
Yeah.
You have a responsibility for that as well?
Not directly in my team. We've got our ecologists, we've got our water quality scientists based in each of our 6 regions. They work closely with particularly the Environment Agency, looking at things like discharges that put water into the system. What's the quality of that discharge? So whilst I'll be worried about the quantity, is it going to cause flooding? Our ecologists and water quality scientists will be saying, well, is it going to cause pollution? Is it going to cause discoloration or odour or things that are coming into the canal that we don't want in there?
And we were on the Lancaster when there was a fairly major pollution incident, which cost a lot of life of wildlife.
It was bad.
And was particularly unpleasant for the people in the area because of the smell. That was a farmland incident.
It was. And we worked closely with the Environment Agency to try and seek prosecution, to seek recovery of costs.
Sure.
And we always urge boaters, if they see a pollution, looks like an oil spill, to let the Environment Agency know. They've got a free phone number. Their environment teams will come out, their environment officers will come out and look at it, and basically try and sort out the issue, find out where
we
it's
know
coming
that's true because when we were there, and we were there right at the breach.
Yeah.
We were moored up there, and the Canal and River Trust ecologist came to talk to us about when we first saw the signs of fish at the surface.
They were trying to pinpoint
where
it had come from.
Exactly where it had come from and what the cause was. So I know you send people out there quickly to investigate these things.
And for the smaller spills and things, maybe just a boater and some diesel spillage, we can get out sort of spill kits to try and contain that, to stop it find its way into other water courses, as well as the canal ecology. Of course, we've got weirs and sluices. The polluted water can then find its way into potentially more pristine water courses and streams that can cause more environmental harm as well. I mean, the canal ecology is really valuable, but in other streams, rivers, you might have other biodiversity you want to protect.
I mean, we're moored on the Leeds and Liverpool now, and we have what do we have? We have an otter right by our boat. She's decided, or he's decided, that's where their home is going to be. Very noisy at night underneath the boat, but you realise
the wildlife
and
everything,
quality environment, because we all love that. That's why we choose to live on boats.
And it's interesting you mentioned about water quality, because one of the very unusual things that happened last year, we had a particularly dry spell in June, and then it ended with a short but fairly intense period of rainfall. There were some summer storms, and actually that led to the most fish kills that our national fisheries team have ever recorded and reported on the network. Unprecedented. Our fisheries manager has been working for the trust for about 30 years, and he said he'd never known that many fish kills. And basically they thought it was a combination of long-ish dry period, quite warm temperatures, and then this sudden change with lots of inflows of water coming in, changing in terms of the chemistry of the water, and suddenly
fish are
the stress
sensitive.
on fish. And we noticed it in so many places. The Environment Agency worked with us to try and look at those, but it was happening on other streams and water courses as well. And it's a very unusual sort of perfect storm of
and it's a natural event, that, isn't it, in a sense?
It is to a point, but it's sort of how much can we do about it? And once you see fish kills, sadly it's almost too late at that point. Seeing fish in distress is the important thing to notice, to be able to get aeration to deoxygenate the water.
That's what they had to do on the Lancaster.
Try and address, if there's a pollution source, try and stop that, reoxygenate the water, look at can you do fish rescues as well, which aren't easy.
No, they took over.
No, they did. They took a load out.
Over 10,000 fish out of just the local marina. To try and save them.
And we have to do that on reservoir projects as well, when we're emptying reservoirs for engineering works, making sure we look at the fish stocks and sample the fish in terms of their fish health, and then move as many of them as we can. The problem with that is, particularly in summer periods when we've got droughts, like we've experienced on the Leeds and Liverpool, so many of the reservoir levels were exceptionally low, and the fish were left in a smaller and smaller body of water to swim.
Less and less oxygen.
There's less oxygen, the temperatures are high, and it was very difficult, because when we're doing an engineering project on one reservoir, we can sometimes move the fish to another one. But when all the reservoir levels are low, there's almost nowhere to take them. So there's a real potential harm for ecology and wildlife when we're in drought periods, which at that point boating and navigation, there may not we may have already restricted the canal
Yeah.
for those purposes, and then we're into sort of ecological, environmental protection. So that we don't have almost environmental emergencies happening in drought events.
Brilliant.
Okay.
That's excellent.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
We hope you enjoyed the video. If you have, please like, comment, and share. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and click the bell to be notified when we put up new content. Stay tuned for more insightful and interesting interviews at the Ellesmere Port National Waterways Museum location. See you soon.